Tupac Shakur murder trial. Keefe D back in court as Day 2 brings new testimony nearly 30 years after Tupac Shakur was fatally shot on a Las Vegas street. The case surrounding the legendary rapper's death is finally being argued before a jury. Duane Keefe D. Davis returned to a Las Vegas courtroom Tuesday for the second day of testimony in the long-awaited murder trial. Davis has pleaded not guilty to the charge and is accused of orchestrating the 1996 shooting that ended Shakur's life. Prosecutors allege Davis helped organize the attack, supplied the weapon and directed the retaliation, although they do not accuse him of actually pulling the trigger. The trial represents a remarkable moment in one of the most famous unsolved murder cases in American history. Shakur was only 25 when he was shot on September 7, 1996, while riding in a BMW driven by Death Row Records co-founder Marion Suge Knight. For decades, questions surrounding the killing remained unanswered. Now prosecutors and defense attorneys are asking jurors to determine whether Davis played a criminal role in the shooting, or whether his years of public statements were exaggerated stories that cannot prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt. A murder that changed hip-hop forever. Tupac Shakur was already one of the biggest names in music when he was attacked in Las Vegas. Earlier that night, Shakur and members of his entourage had been involved in a physical confrontation at the MGM Grand, involving Orlando "Baby" Lane Anderson, Davis' nephew. Prosecutors contend that the confrontation became the motive for a retaliatory attack later that evening. According to the prosecution's theory, Davis and others got into a white Cadillac and followed the BMW carrying Shakur and Knight. The Cadillac eventually pulled alongside the BMW near the Las Vegas Strip. Gunfire erupted. Shakur was struck 4 times. Knight was also injured but survived. Shakur was transported to the hospital where he died 6 days later. Prosecutors now argue that what happened that night was not a random shooting, but the result of a planned act of retaliation. Davis is not accused of being the shooter. One of the most important points in the trial is that prosecutors do not claim Davis was the person who fired the fatal shots. Instead, the state alleges that Davis orchestrated the operation. Prosecutors say he helped obtain the firearm, organized the people involved, and participated in the retaliatory attack. Under Nevada law, the prosecution does not necessarily have to prove that Davis personally pulled the trigger if it can establish that he intentionally participated in or helped facilitate the killing. That distinction could become critical as jurors evaluate the evidence. The prosecution's case relies heavily on statements Davis made over the years, including accounts contained in his 2019 memoir, Compton Street Legend, as well as interviews in which he discussed the events surrounding Shakur's death. But the defense has a very different explanation. Defense says Davis was an exaggerator. Davis attorneys are challenging the reliability of his past statements. The defense argues that Davis had a history of telling sensational stories, and that statements made years after the shooting should not automatically be treated as confessions. That argument puts Davis' own words at the center of the trial. If prosecutors can convince jurors that Davis repeatedly provided accurate details that only someone involved in the crime would have known, his statements could become powerful evidence. If the defense successfully establishes that Davis embellished his stories for attention, money, or notoriety, those same statements could become much less convincing. The defense has also questioned the quality of the original investigation and the lack of physical evidence directly tying Davis to the shooting. Day 2 focuses on witnesses and earlier statements. Tuesday's proceedings continued the presentation of evidence following Monday's opening statements and initial witnesses. A former law enforcement officer who was involved in the immediate aftermath of the shooting has provided testimony about Shakur's condition and what happened as officers attempted to respond to the shooting. One particularly significant issue involves Shakur's refusal to identify his attacker. According to testimony reported from the courtroom, Shakur did not tell police who shot him while being transported to the hospital. The testimony suggested that Shakur indicated his own associates would handle the person responsible. That detail has remained one of the more haunting aspects of the case. Shakur's refusal to cooperate with investigators left authorities without one of the most potentially valuable pieces of evidence, a direct identification from the victim himself. 30 years later, prosecutors are attempting to construct their case through witness testimony, historical evidence, and Davis' own statements. The 1990s gang rivalry is back in the spotlight. The trial is also revisiting the violent atmosphere surrounding hip-hop in the mid-1990s. At the time, Shakur was closely associated with Death Row Records and was involved in a highly publicized rivalry between artists and groups associated with the West Coast and East Coast rap scenes. The feud involved far more than music. Gang affiliations, personal conflicts, and street rivalries increasingly became intertwined with the entertainment industry. The confrontation at the MGM Grand involving Anderson is central to prosecutors' explanation of why the shooting allegedly occurred. According to the state's theory, the attack was intended as revenge. The prosecution has characterized Davis as the person who helped turn that confrontation into a deadly retaliation. The case took decades to reach court. The fact that Davis is now sitting at the defense table is extraordinary given how much time has passed. For nearly 3 decades, no one was convicted of killing Shakur. The investigation remained one of the most closely watched cold cases in popular culture, generating countless theories about who was responsible and why the rapper was killed. The case received a major boost after investigators focused renewed attention on Davis and his public statements. In 2023, Las Vegas authorities arrested Davis and charged him with murder. His prosecution eventually became the first courtroom case directly stemming from Shakur's killing. Now a jury must decide whether the evidence is enough to establish Davis' criminal responsibility. What the jury must decide. The central question is not simply whether Davis was present when Shakur was killed. The prosecution must prove the elements of the murder charge against him beyond a reasonable doubt. Prosecutors are expected to argue that Davis' involvement went far beyond being a passenger or witness. They contend that he was involved in planning the attack and securing the weapon. The defense, meanwhile, is expected to continue attacking the credibility of Davis' past statements and the prosecution's interpretation of events. That creates a fascinating courtroom battle. The prosecution has a defendant who has spoken publicly about the case for years. The defense has an opportunity to argue that those very statements demonstrate why Davis should not be believed. The missing shooter. Another major issue is the identity of the person who actually fired the shots. Davis is not accused of being the trigger man, and several of the people believed to have been connected to the shooting are now dead. That creates enormous challenges for both investigators and prosecutors. Witness memories have faded. Some potential witnesses are unavailable. Physical evidence from 1996 is limited. The passage of time could therefore become one of the defense's most important arguments. The prosecution, however, believes the passage of time does not erase Davis' own accounts of what happened. Tupac's family watches for Shakur's family and millions of fans. The trial represents something more than another criminal proceeding. Tupac's death became one of the defining tragedies in music history. He had released numerous successful albums and built a reputation as an artist willing to address poverty, racism, violence, relationships, and social inequality. His career was still developing when his life was suddenly cut short. His death also became part of the mythology surrounding 1990s hip-hop. For years, fans have debated everything from the identity of the shooter to the possibility of larger conspiracies surrounding the murder. The courtroom now provides an opportunity to replace speculation with evidence. A potential life sentence. If convicted, Davis could face life in prison. That enormous potential punishment underscores the stakes of the proceedings. For prosecutors, this is an opportunity to finally hold someone accountable for a killing that has remained unresolved for almost 30 years. For the defense, the stakes are equally enormous. Davis has pleaded not guilty and is entitled to the presumption of innocence unless prosecutors prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. The trial is expected to continue for weeks, with numerous witnesses and pieces of evidence still to come. The end of one of hip-hop's biggest mysteries. Few murder cases have remained as deeply embedded in popular culture as the killing of Tupac Shakur. His music continues to attract new generations of listeners. His image remains instantly recognizable, and the circumstances surrounding his death have been debated for decades. But a courtroom is different from the internet, documentaries, or fan theories. Jurors will not be asked to determine which conspiracy theory sounds most convincing. They will be asked to evaluate evidence. As day 2 of the trial continues in Las Vegas, prosecutors are attempting to show that Duane Keefe D. Davis was not merely a man who later talked about a famous crime. They contend he was a participant who helped make the killing happen. The defense says the story is far less certain, and that Davis' own words cannot substitute for reliable proof. After nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions, those competing narratives are finally being tested before a jury. And for the first time, the world is watching a courtroom determine whether anyone will ultimately be held legally responsible for the murder of Tupac Shakur.
Adventure starts with the right gear, and it all starts at shackshop.us. From stylish women's swimsuits and premium camping tents to paddleboards, underwater drones, and dependable dinghies, we have everything you need for your next outdoor adventure. Whether you're exploring the water or relaxing on shore, gear up with quality products at unbeatable prices. Visit shackshop.us today and make every adventure